Um, Hi, we're Team 6417, the Blue Crew. We're an FTC based in Rockville, Maryland, and the purpose of this video is to teach our new members and also new FTC teams, or maybe just FTCs looking for some advice on how to structure your engineering notebook, which is a pretty confusing part of being a first team. It's not super intuitive when you think of just the phrase high school robotics competition, but it is a really, really important part of being a successful FTC team, which is why we decided it was important to create a video to help people through the whole process of creating our notebook. So in this video, I'll be touching on the content in your engineering notebook, how to format an engineering notebook, the timeline for working on an engineering notebook throughout your competition season, and then some Blue Crew advice and aid on making an award-worthy notebook. We consider ourselves decently qualified to make this video because in the past, in pretty much all of our past seasons, we've won an award which requires an engineering notebook as a component to winning an award. So not the robotics competition aspect, but we've won design, think, motivate, connect, and control in the past maybe 4 seasons. So we have pretty much figured out how to do a notebook at this point, and we're hoping some of our advice can help you guys too. So the content in an engineering notebook, this is outlined in the first guide, but we'll go over it here in a little bit more detail with my own input sort of in there too. Okay, so the main components of your notebook: the team information section, your engineering section, and then your team plan. Those are pretty much the primary areas that you need to hit in your notebook. The team information section. These are the components that Blue Crew includes in our notebooks. Some of these are optional, some are not. So starting with the season summary. At the beginning of our notebook, at the very top, we include a summary of what happened for our entire season. It essentially summarizes the entire engineering notebook because the notebooks start to get really long. Judges don't really have time to look through them in their entirety, so having this section is really helpful. It's not technically a requirement, so you don't need to include it, but based on judge feedback, we think it's a pretty helpful thing for judges to have, just because if they don't have a lot of time or they need a refresher on your team, maybe after, in between interviewing you and doing the pit crew interviews, it's really helpful for them to be able to just get an overview of your progress for the entire season. So this includes engineering things, business things, team happenings, that sort of thing. It's typically 2 to 3 pages for us. Then we have a mission statement next. So this is usually like 2 to 4 sentences. What our team decides is its purpose for the season. It's usually grounded in becoming better engineers and becoming more effective at inspiring kids in our community to get involved in STEM. We really recommend when you pick a mission statement for your team, look at the first values, which include discovery, innovation, fun, cooperation, gracious professionalism, those sorts of things when you're considering your mission statement. Then we typically give an overview of FIRST and FTC. This is recommended. It may seem kind of stupid to be including it in something that's going to be given to a judge who obviously knows what FTC is. But if you include, a paragraph on each, it also kind of helps remind you of where FIRST started and where the purpose of FTC is to keep your team grounded in, trying to become better engineers and engagers in your community. So we usually take up about a page. You want to write like a paragraph for each of these. Then we have a team history section. We give an overview of our team since its inception in 2012, some of our award history, our performance at past competitions, particularly focusing on our last season, and then a description of the team, where are we based. We're part of this organization called the Explorer Post, so we explain that. We're part of a sort of conglomerate of engineering teams, that sort of thing. Then we tend to explain our team organization, so sort of how we structure our going-ons. This is kind of helpful for the judges to know what kind of team we are. So we tend to have captains, co-captains usually, and then sort of heads of sub-teams within our own team that focus on different aspects of FTC. So engineering, coding, outreach and business, that sort of thing. And then how we schedule our meetings. So we typically have engineering meetings 3 times a week. And then we have a meeting entirely devoted to business. We recommend that you do make time for business and also notebook documentation at some point in your meeting, so you're going to want to explain it in this section. This is just sort of, how is your team organized? Yeah. Then we do biographies, so who are our team members, just some basic information about them, and then who are our coaches and mentors, and then what do they do, what's their area of expertise. Then we cover team relations, so our relationships with our community, how we're involved in outreach, relationships with other first teams, FLL teams too, and then our sponsors, and give a big thank you to your sponsors in this section because they're super, super important. Then we like to define core values at the beginning of the year. I don't think this is this is a required section, but it's good to keep your team sort of focused in that sense. And then our team resources, so everything from the Google Suite to Fusion 360 for CAD to FIRST resources. We like to update those throughout the year, and then put them in this section. So overall, the section is pretty brief. It's not super intensive in terms of writing. These are probably team history, team relationships, maybe team organization are the ones that require the most amount of writing. But yeah, don't sweat this section too much. It's unlikely that judges, this will make or break your team, but it's good to give the judges a little bit of insight into how you conduct yourselves. The next is the engineering section, so we've explained this in a different video, so go check that out for more information. But these are the elements that we tend to include in our engineering section. So it's not included here, but there's an engineering section summary that we add in at the end of our season. Again, really, really helpful for the judges, and it has basically a paragraph summarizing each of these sections, and we've gotten feedback that it's pretty helpful. So that's something to consider. We set goals beginning of the season. We detail our design process, our strategy for the game that year. We include our engineering meetings and then extract the major progress of our robot. We think that's kind of helpful for judges if, the notebook ends up being very long because we like to be very detailed in it. It's really helpful for absent members to be able to look at our engineering meetings and really track our thought processes, so it ends up being really long. So we recommend having sort of your key moments of robot evolution and then maybe tab certain pages in your engineering meetings so that your judge knows, the biggest things that happen with the progression of your robot. How code developed, it's good to have a summary at the beginning of the section, and then the relevance of science and math. Science and math and code development are infused in the engineering meetings, but it's good to have them sort of pulled out and put a spotlight on them. Pretty helpful for the judges. This is probably the longest section of your notebook. This engineering meetings, you want to be really detailed. Each of our meetings usually ends up being minimum of 1 page, but it can go up to 3 depending on how many diagrams and pictures we include. And, use it as a tool for you, less as a requirement for notebook. For absent members, they want to be able to see what you did. So try to think of that when you're creating it. And yeah, that's the engineering section. And then your team plan. Also a hefty section, maybe a little less intensive because of the lack of engineering meetings. But yeah, you're going to include the elements of your team plan. We typically have a business plan, sustainability plan, and strategic plan. You can also have sort of a skills plan, how you plan to develop skills for the season, or, pull out a specific fundraising plan, which we didn't do this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic and difficulty of fundraising without, being able to be in person safely. So these are the plans we had this year, and then the different sections within them. So we start each with the plan summary, then what activities did we do, track our finances and business. We try to reflect on these at the end of our season so we can improve for the next season and then develop future plans based on that reflection. Our strategic plan is we try to evaluate ourselves as a team at the beginning of the season. You should do that too. Set some goals, which are outlined in business, sustainability, and engineering. Why you pick those goals, it's really nice for judges to be able to see why you chose the goals that you did. Kind of the steps that you plan to execute to achieve those goals, your proposed timeline, and then your real timeline, what you plan to happen, and then what actually ends up happening. Evaluating how effective your plan was. Try to create metrics that are quantitative. They're really helpful. So say you set a goal of having a certain number of outreach events and you want to see how effective it was based on how many people signed on to your email chain. Something like that is really helpful in evaluating the success of your plan. And then documenting your team's obstacles and accomplishments throughout the season really shows judges. It helps judges kind of look into your team and what happened with you guys and your resilience and overcoming obstacles. So yeah, try to make that personal and reflective and introspective and those sorts of things. Okay, so moving on to formatting. We start with the cover page. The requirements are your team name and number. I believe that's the only 2 requirements. And then what we include, title, team photo. We couldn't get one this year because of the pandemic. It wasn't safe enough to have everyone there at all meetings. Then your competition season name, competition season year, just here. So that's our cover page. Yeah. And then your summary page, again, not required, but it summarizes the notebook, focusing on the team's development over the season. Really important, highlight the key points of each of your sections. And then try to establish a personal connection with the judge that's reading it by explaining what kind of obstacles you guys had to overcome as a team and how those were important to your development. Those sorts of things. Right, and then formatting. Table of contents. Definitely use Google Docs so it can do this automatically. And then we typically do team info, then engineering, then team plan in the order that I outlined in the content section, which you can go back to in this video. We tend to do this because this is general information, segueing into, the engineering plan. then the business and sustainability plan, and then the strategic plan. So how we were able to achieve the plans outlined in those three. We've also been known to take the strategic plan out of the team plan, move it here. So kind of explain our goals, how we achieve those goals, and then go into the specific, this is the engineering goals. This is what we did to achieve our engineering goals in this section, then business and sustainability. As long as there's a sort of coherent organization, it doesn't really matter how you fine-tune sort of the organization of your notebook. And then, housekeeping tips. Use a document with a collaborative feature so multiple people can work. I know that you can use, a handwritten format. Really don't recommend that. You can always take pictures of designs, but it's hard to work on something at the same time if you're using paper. So definitely recommend the G Suite Google Docs. Use a font. Try to make it sort of professional looking. Sort of simplistic. You want the focus to be on what you're saying, not how it looks as much. So information is more important. So like this slide's theme, way too informal for your engineering notebook. Google Docs has a feature for headings and normal text, so make sure your formatting is the same all the way throughout. And then tables, graphs, images, diagrams, wherever you can possibly fit them. It's a really, really great way of transmitting information. It helps the judges because they get tired of reading blocks of text, so it's super, super helpful. Now going into the timeline, so how you should be working on Notebook throughout the competition season. General timeline, formatting your notebook at the beginning, setting the objectives and goals for and outlining those in Notebook, detailing your progress on meeting those goals, and then sort of overviewing, evaluating, and summarizing your progress towards the end. So at the beginning of your season, format the notebook. Use multiple documents. It's really helpful to separate out team info from engineering from your team plan, just so that you don't have loading issues. We also keep separate documents for our engineering meetings and organize them by month because that tends to get really long. We try to create identical formatting for all of them so that when we compile everything, it's really simple. And we can add the pages in later, page numbers in later. And then, section headings, try to make sure that formatting is the same. And at the beginning of the season, you gotta start making sure you're already in the habit of documenting everything you're doing during meetings and updating that meeting log because it will go into your notebook. So, yep, as I said. And then what sections you should specifically try to focus on. Develop your mission statement and figure out how your team's going to be organized at the beginning of the season. And you can write that in early. Your engineering section, figure out what your design process is going to be. So, planning or brainstorming, planning, building, etc. Your initial game strategy, you can pretty much do this once the game is released. And then goals and rationale for your engineering plan. For your team plan, again, goals and rationale. This is a really good time to get your strategic plan pretty much set. Figure out your SWOT analysis, the steps you're taking to achieve your goals, your timeline. And then try to figure out your budget really early on in the season because you do need to make robot part purchases, or you probably will, and you really need to know how much money you have to do that. During the season, remember always take notes during meetings and keep updating your meeting log. Super, super, super important. This is when you're going to be updating your write-ups about your activities and what steps you took to complete the goals. So at the beginning of the season, focusing on planning the goals, planning how you're achieving the goals, and then documenting how you're actually doing that during the season. The sections you can write up during this time, some of the team info things, as you get to know your team members better. You can do the biographies, that sort of thing. Your engineering meetings always need to be updated, and then these sort of get updated along with the engineering meetings as part of them. So that all goes together. And then your team plan, your real timeline of what you're actually getting done as opposed to your planned timeline that you set at the beginning of the season. You can write that out. Start updating your income and expenses so you don't only have a budget, which is your predicted income and expenses, but you have the actual values. So update that section. Then you need to outline what you've been doing in these activities and how you've been achieving your goals, and then some of the obstacles you've started encountering and how you're either working to overcome them or how you have already overcome them. And then right before the competition, once you've done pretty much all the sections of Notebook, that's when you can get to your section summaries and then your season summary, which pretty much happens last. So you can update your resources during the season and at the end of the season. You want to do this at the end too. You kind of need to see your entire engineering meeting log to be able to pull out the key points of your robot evolution over the season. And then your team plan, since you should have executed at least most of it by the time competition comes around, you can evaluate and reflect on it and start drawing up future plans, what you plan to do after the competition, to keep expanding and working on your goals. And then just like right before the competition, you need to compile all your documents into one document, add in those page numbers, make sure you proofread. It's going to take a long time, but it's really important that, you make sure your team goes through and make sure your engineering notebook is the best it can be and, doing your team's hard work justice. And as you do this, make sure you note which pages are good to highlight for the judges and then which themes you should be highlighting in your interview. So that's kind of the added bonus of going through and proofreading. You get to figure out, it helps you be more organized for the competition. And then, assuming the portfolio requirement continues into next year, extracting everything from your notebook and making sort of portfolio, sort of basically the summary. It's essentially the summary of your notebook. Okay, and then the Blue Crew tips and resources on creating an award-worthy notebook. Our tips: format your notebook at the beginning of the season. Some housekeeping things for documenting meetings. Use the format that we outline in our other video about engineering. Try to separate out your figures from your writing. It's pretty helpful to say, reference figure 1 in a separate table that's maybe an image, and then separate that out from the writing. So that when your judge is going through, they can pretty much look at the pictures instead of the writing if they don't have a lot of time as the evolution of your progress. So, taking pictures of a whiteboard with notes on it, and then taking pictures of prototype, and then changes to your robot, and then testing and that sort of thing. Sort of a visual way of looking through your progress. This is really important. Get visual evidence of everything you're doing. Diagrams and tables are really helpful for showing testing data, that sort of thing. It's a good rest for the judge's eyes. You don't have to keep looking at blocks of text. Take notes during your meetings and then write entries after the meetings. No one wants to sit there writing while everyone's having fun building the robot. So it's perfectly okay to just have someone jot down some notes during the meeting, and then after the meeting you can sort of write the detailed entry. If people aren't too enthusiastic about documenting during the meeting, or you can schedule time at the end, the last 30 minutes for everyone to document. That's a really good strategy too. Treat entries as a way of filling in your absent members. That makes it feel less like a chore and more like something that's really important to do, so that your team is moving together and everyone knows what's happening. And the only way to do that is to write really detailed entries that explain even your thought processes. So not only concrete things, but even your ideas. It's really good to divide up responsibilities for notebooks amongst all members and make sure that you have a really good, well-rounded look at what your team's been doing, no matter who knows what. Definitely proofread it. Try to be reflective. Include summaries for the benefit of judges. It can feel a little bit like an unnecessary task, but it really, really does help them out, and they'll thank you for it. Tab your best pages. Again, really helpful. Your notebook's going to be really long, so anything that you think is really strong in it, you should tab it so that the judges know to look at it, because they will flip to it if you mark it. It's almost 100% guaranteed. Look at sample notebooks online. Can't stress this enough. People have been really great about posting their past notebooks that have even won awards. So you can look at them for pretty much the meeting-to-meeting happenings of successful teams. Super helpful. And then when you're looking back at your notebook, use that to find common themes that you can base your interview around. Remember, your interview is trying to give your judges enough insight to consider you for as many awards as possible. So if you make it explain the overall journey of your team in terms of engineering and business and sustainability, so your engineering and your team plan, then they will be able to consider you for pretty much all possible awards, not counting, like control. So that's really, really important. And then our most helpful resources from FIRST. This explains sort of the requirements, but then the most important thing, Googling FTC Engineering Notebook. Just submit that into Google or type that into Google, pull up some sample notebooks and use that to help you. Can't stress that enough. That is super, super helpful. Probably the best thing you can do for your team, and I recommend doing it at the beginning of the season. So you know what direction you should be heading in. Don't do it at the end and try to change your notebook to fit what an engineering notebook should look like. So yeah, that concludes this video. Good luck to all the FTC teams out there. We wish you the best on your competition.